The fire crackles softly tonight, its golden light dancing across weathered stone and casting long shadows that seem to reach back through centuries. There is something timeless about this moment, something that connects us to every human who has ever sat beside flickering flames and wondered about the stories hidden in darkness. Tonight, we journey together into the quiet mysteries of the past, where great structures stand broken against the sky and ancient voices whisper through ruins that have lasted empires. The embers glow like tiny stars fallen to earth, and in their warm light we can almost see the ghosts of history moving through the shadows. These are not tales of conquest or glory, but quieter stories, the kind that unfold slowly like smoke rising from dying coals. They speak of stones that once stood proud and tall, of hands that built wonders only for time to claim them piece by piece, of simple meals shared by firelight just as we might share stories now. There is a peculiar comfort in contemplating ruin, in understanding that even the mightiest works of human ambition eventually become part of something larger, something more mysterious. The great amphitheater of Rome stands tonight with half its face missing, like a moon in permanent eclipse. And we might wonder where those missing stones have gone, what they have become, whose hands have touched them across the flowing centuries. We invite you now to settle deeper into this moment, to let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you backward through time, where Roman legions march in perfect formation across distant provinces, where Saxon warriors gather in timber halls filled with the golden glow of Mead, where the past lives on, not in monuments alone, but in the simple human moments that connect us all. The fire burns lower now, its light growing softer, and in that dimming glow we begin to see the shadows of ancient Rome, where marble gleams white against the Mediterranean sky and crowds gather beneath arches that will outlast them all by centuries. Let the warmth of the flames ease you into contemplation. For tonight we explore not just history, but the strange alchemy by which the past becomes present. How stones become stories, how memory becomes dream. The crackling of the fire becomes the whisper of wind through broken walls, and we find ourselves standing in the shadow of the greatest arena the world has ever known, wondering at the mystery of its missing half and the countless stories hidden in its remaining stones in this gentle twilight between waking and sleeping. Between past and present, we discover that history is not a distant country, but a living thing that breathes around us still. Its heartbeats synchronized with our own, its stories waiting to be told in voices as soft as embers settling into ash. The night grows deeper, the fire burns lower, and somewhere in the darkness of ancient Rome, the shadow of the Colosseum falls across cobblestones worn smooth by countless feet, each step a small part of the great, unending story of human presence upon this earth. The evening air carries with it the scent of old stone and distant time, and we breathe it in like a prayer, feeling our own small moment expand to touch the edges of eternity. Tonight, we are archaeologists of sleep, excavating dreams from the ruins of memory, finding in the broken places something beautiful and whole that speaks to the heart of Corinth, of what it means to be human in the face of time's endless passage. The eternal shadow of the Colosseum. The Colosseum rises from the heart of Rome like a great wounded beast, its broken face turned toward the sky in permanent contemplation of its own glory and decay. For stories of travertine limestone and tough volcanic rock climb toward heaven. But where once there stood a perfect oval of stone, now only half remains. The other portion vanished into the mists of history like a dream. Half remembered upon waking dot, stand with us now in the gathering dusk beside this monument to both human ambition and time's patient work, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down through layers of silence. The tourists have departed with the daylight, and in this quieter hour we can almost hear the whispers of the past echoing through corridors that once rang with the roar of 50,000 voices raised in bloodthirsty celebration. The missing half of the Colosseum tells a story as compelling as any gladiatorial contest ever fought upon its arena floor. A slow-motion drama of decay and transformation that unfolded across more than 1,000 years. When the great amphitheater opened in the year 80 of the Common Era, during the reign of Emperor Titus, it stood complete and magnificent. Its 4 tiers of arches creating a perfect symphony in stone that could be seen from miles across the Roman countryside. But even as the last gladiator fell upon its sands, even as the final wild beast was slain for the entertainment of the masses, time had already begun its own quiet campaign against this wonder of the ancient world. The earth beneath Rome trembles with a deep geological patience, and across the centuries earthquakes shook the foundations of the empire's greatest buildings with increasing violence and frequency. The earthquake of 847 sent the first cracks racing through the Colosseum's mighty walls, followed by another in 1231 that caused entire sections of the outer ring to collapse into rubble. But it was not the sudden violence of seismic events alone that claimed the missing stones, rather a slower, more human process of transformation that speaks to our species' remarkable ability to adapt, to survive, to make new beauty from the broken remains of old glory, as Rome itself declined from the capital of an empire to a smaller, medieval city struggling to maintain its identity among the ruins of its former grandeur. The great amphitheater became something it was never intended to be: a quarry of pre-cut stone waiting to be harvested by practical hands. The marble seats that once cushioned senators and their wives were pried free by crowbars and carried away on ox-drawn carts, destined to become altarpieces in Christian churches where prayers would replace the cheers of bloodthirsty crowds. The travertine blocks that formed the outer walls, each one cut and fitted with mathematical precision by Roman engineers, were taken piece by piece to construct the palaces of Renaissance nobles, who built their new power upon the literal foundations of ancient authority. Pope Sixtus V, in the late 16th century, even considered turning the entire remaining structure into a wool factory, a plan that speaks to how completely the building's original purpose had been forgotten in favor of immediate, practical concerns. Walk now in imagination around the surviving portion of the Colosseum, as night falls completely across the eternal city, and feel how the broken wall creates a strange dialogue between presence and absence, between what remains and what has vanished into the fabric of Rome itself. The missing half exists still, but transformed, scattered through 1,000 buildings across the city where its marble gleams and chapel walls and its travertine supports the weight of palaces, built by families whose names have themselves been forgotten by all but scholars of obscure genealogies. There is something both melancholy and magnificent in this slow dissolution, this patient recycling of glory into utility, of spectacle into shelter. The stones that once echoed with the clash of gladiatorial combat now support the walls of churches, where different kinds of salvation are sought, where prayers rise like incense toward heaven from lips that speak languages unknown to Caesar or Trajan or any of the emperors who watched the games from their marble seats. The hypogeum, that vast network of underground chambers and tunnels where gladiators waited in darkness for their moment in the sun, still exists beneath the arena floor, but the wooden flooring that once covered it has long since rotted away, leaving the subterranean world exposed to sky like an anatomical drawing of some great creature whose skin has been peeled back to reveal the complex machinery of life and death. Standing here in the darkness beside this broken giant, we can almost see the ghost of its missing half shimmering in the air like heat waves rising from summer pavement. A phantom architecture that exists now only in the collective memory of humanity and VHR, and scattered stones that have found new purpose in doorways and foundations throughout the city. The Colosseum is both ruin and rebirth, both ending and beginning. a testament to the strange alchemy by which civilizations transform themselves across the centuries. The wind moves through the broken arches with a sound like distant voices, and perhaps it carries still some echo of those who gathered here across 5 centuries of Roman power. From emperors to slaves, from gladiators to wild beasts brought from the farthest corners of the known world. But more than this, it carries the whispers of all those who came after. The medieval stonemasons and Renaissance architects. The common people who built their humble homes with fragments of imperial marble, making the glory of ancient Rome part of their own daily lives in ways both practical and profound. Stones that built a city. Stolen stones of the Colosseum did not vanish into oblivion, but rather dissolved into the very bones of Rome itself, becoming part of a vast, unconscious recycling project that would continue for centuries as the city reinvented itself upon the foundation of its own glorious past. Like blood flowing through veins, the marble and travertine that once formed the perfect oval of the great amphitheater spread throughout the eternal city, carrying with them the memory of ancient spectacles, even as they took on new purposes in a changing worlds. Follow now the ghostly trail of these wandering stones as they journey from their original home beside the Roman Forum to their new incarnations throughout the medieval and Renaissance city. A piece of marble that once provided seating for a Roman matron watching gladiatorial games might find itself carved into an altar step in the Church of Santa Maria in Cosmedon, where pilgrims would kneel to pray without ever knowing that their knees pressed against stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of emperors. The great blocks of travertine limestone that formed the outer walls of the Colosseum, each one weighing several tons and fitted together with iron clamps in a display of engineering prowess that still inspires awe today, were especially prized by medieval builders who recognized quality when they saw it. These massive stones, already cut to precise specifications by Roman craftsmen centuries before, required only transport and installation to become the foundations of churches, palaces, and fortifications throughout the city. The Palazzo della Cancelleria, that magnificent Renaissance palace that still stands near the Campo de' Fiori, rose from foundations built entirely from Colosseum travertine. Its elegant arcades and courtyards unknowingly echoing the architectural rhythms of the ancient amphitheater. Visitors who stroll through its peaceful gardens today walk upon stones that once trembled beneath the roar of 50,000 voices demanding bread and circuses from their imperial masters. But it was not only the great palaces and churches that claimed these ancient stones. For the practical necessities of daily life in medieval Rome required materials for humbler purposes as well. The lime kilns that operated throughout the city during the Middle Ages consumed countless tons of marble from the Colosseum and other Roman ruins, transforming carved masterpieces into the mortar that would hold together the walls of workshops, homes, and shops where ordinary Romans lived and worked and raised their children. Walk with us now through the narrow streets of Trastevere at dawn, when the morning light catches the fragments of ancient marble embedded in walls that have stood for 600 years or more. Here, a carved acanthus leaf from a Corinthian capital peers out from beneath layers of medieval plaster. There, a section of fluted column serves as a cornerstone for a building that houses a modern pizzeria. Its ovens fired by wood that creates ash not unlike the dust of gladiators who died so many centuries ago. The Via dei Cappuccini runs straight as an arrow from the Palazzo Massimo toward the Tiber, and beneath the modern asphalt lie foundations built from Colosseum stone, creating a hidden archaeology of recycled glory that extends throughout the historic center of Rome like a vast underground museum whose exhibits have been pressed into service as the literal foundation of contemporary life. Pope Sixtus IV, in the late 15th century, ordered the construction of the Sistine Chapel, that sacred space where papal conclaves still gather to elect new leaders of the Catholic Church. And among the materials used in its construction were stones quarried from the Colosseum's gradually diminishing bulk. The walls that would later bear witness to Michelangelo's vision of the Last Judgment were built in part from marble that had once been splattered with the blood of gladiators and wild animals. A transformation so complete that it speaks to the strange alchemy by which human societies reinvent themselves across the centuries. The Palazzo Venezia, with its massive tower that dominates the view from the Capitoline Hill, incorporated so much material from ancient Roman buildings that it became known as a museum of recycled antiquity. Its walls a patchwork of imperial marble, Republican travertine, and medieval brick that tells the entire story of Rome in stone. Mussolini would later use this palace as his headquarters, addressing crowds from its balcony in a conscious echo of imperial Rome that demonstrated how the past continues to shape the present in ways both obvious and subtle. But perhaps the most poetic transformation of Colosseum stone occurred in the countless small churches scattered throughout Rome's neighborhoods, where fragments of the great amphitheater became part of altars dedicated to saints who had themselves been martyred in similar arenas throughout the empire. The Church of San Stefano Rotondo, built in the 5th century on the Celian Hill, incorporated columns and capitals taken from various Roman ruins, including the Colosseum, creating a space where Christian prayers rose toward heaven through architecture that had originally been designed to celebrate very different kinds of sacrifice. These stolen stones carry with them a kind of geological memory, a record written in marble and travertine of the great transformation that turned pagan Rome into Christian Rome, imperial Rome into papal Rome, ancient Rome into the eternal city that exists today. Each block that was pried from the Colosseum's walls and carried away by ox cart to become part of some new construction carried with it invisible traces of all the lives it had witnessed, all the dramas it had overseen, all the history it had absorbed during its centuries of service to the entertainment of the masses. The process of this great stone migration continued well into the 18th century, when Pope Benedict XIV finally declared the Colosseum a sacred site where early Christians had been martyred, a designation that provided protection from further pillaging while simultaneously creating a new mythology around the ancient structure. By then, however, the damage had been done, and half the great amphitheater had already been transformed into the living tissue of Rome itself, its stones beating with the pulse of a city that had learned to build its future from the carefully preserved fragments of its past. Whispers of the gladiators. In the deep silence that settles over the Colosseum's ruins after midnight, when even the traffic of modern Rome has diminished to an occasional whisper, we can almost hear them still. The voices of men who lived and died for the entertainment of crowds that have themselves been dust for 15 centuries. These were not the legendary heroes of Hollywood imagination, but human beings as complex and contradictory as any who have ever drawn breath. Men whose lives have been reduced to myth, but whose reality was far more nuanced than our modern stereotypes might suggest. The gladiators who fought and died upon the sand-covered floor of the great amphitheater came from every corner of the Roman world. Prisoners of war sold into slavery, condemned criminals seeking redemption through combat, and increasingly, as the empire matured, free men who chose the dangerous profession for reasons as varied as desperation, ambition, or simple hunger for glory. They lived in barracks called ludi, scattered throughout Rome and other major cities, training schools that were part prison, part military academy, and part theatrical company preparing performers for the most dangerous show on earth. Archaeological excavations have revealed the intimate details of gladiatorial life with a precision that brings these ancient warriors into sharp focus across the centuries. At Pompeii, where volcanic ash preserved a gladiatorial barracks in perfect detail, we find small cells barely large enough for a man to lie down, each equipped with shackles that were removed only for training and performance. But we also find evidence of a complex social hierarchy within these schools, with successful gladiators earning privileges, private rooms, and even the right to take wives and raise families within the confines of their dangerous profession. The diet of gladiators, revealed through analysis of skeletal remains from gladiatorial cemeteries, tells a story of men who were valuable property, carefully maintained by owners who understood that a healthy fighter was a profitable fighter. They ate well by the standards of their time, consuming large quantities of barley, beans, and vegetables that built the muscle mass needed for combat, supplemented by modest amounts of meat and a calcium-rich drink made from plant ash that strengthened bones against the inevitable fractures that came with their profession. But beyond the physical realities of their lives, the gladiators inhabited a strange psychological space between slave and celebrity, between condemned criminal and public hero. The most successful among them became household names throughout the empire, their images reproduced on oil lamps, wine cups, wall paintings in taverns and homes from Britain to Egypt. Women of all social classes, from slaves to senators' wives, wrote love letters to famous gladiators, and archaeological evidence suggests that many of these warriors maintained long-term relationships and even marriages, despite their legally ambiguous status. The training regimens followed by gladiators have been reconstructed from surviving manuals and archaeological evidence, revealing a sophisticated understanding of combat psychology and physical conditioning that would not seem out of place in a modern military academy. They learned not only to fight, but to die well, to face death with dignity and courage that would earn the respect of crowds who had paid to see them suffer. The thumbs up or thumbs down of the emperor was merely the final moment in a drama that had been carefully choreographed to extract maximum emotional impact from audiences who craved authentic experiences of life and death in an increasingly artificial world. Each type of gladiator, from the heavily armored Murmillo to the lightly equipped Retiarius with his net and trident, represented a different approach to the central problem of survival in the arena. These fighting styles were not arbitrary, but reflected careful study of military tactics, national fighting traditions, and audience preferences that had evolved over centuries of experimentation with different forms of lethal entertainment. The secutor, designed specifically to fight the receiver, carried equipment that negated the net fighters' advantages while creating visual contrasts that enhanced the dramatic tension of their encounters. The moment of death in the arena was surrounded by rituals and traditions that transformed what might otherwise have been mere murder into something approaching religious ceremony. Gladiators who fought bravely, even in defeat, could earn the wooden sword of freedom, the rudes that marked their graduation from slavery to honored veteran status. Those who died were carried from the arena through the Porta Libitinensis, the gate of death. Their body is treated with respect and buried in special cemeteries, where their tombstones recorded not only their names, but their fighting records, their victories and defeats preserved in stone for posterity. The psychological pressure of living constantly under the threat of violent death created a unique culture within the gladiatorial schools, a brotherhood forged in shared danger that transcended the usual boundaries of slavery and freedom. Roman and barbarian, citizen and foreigner, they developed their own slang, their own religious practices, their own codes of honor that governed behavior both inside and outside the arena. Some gladiators formed romantic partnerships with each other, relationships that were tolerated and even celebrated by audiences who appreciated any form of authentic human emotion in the artificial environment of the games. The retirement of successful gladiators presents us with one of the most intriguing aspects of this strange profession. For those who survived long enough to earn their freedom often became trainers, opening their own schools and passing on their hard-won knowledge to new generations of fighters. Some became bodyguards to wealthy Romans who valued their combat skills, while others parlayed their fame into successful business ventures. Their celebrity status opening doors that would otherwise have remained closed to men of their humble origins. As we stand now in the underground chambers, where these men waited for their turn to face death, we can almost feel the weight of their accumulated anxiety and hope pressing down through the centuries, like layers of sediment in which their stories have been buried. The wooden benches where they sat have long since rotted away, but the stone walls still bear graffiti scratched by nervous hands, messages to lovers and gods that reveal the human heart's beating. Within bodies trained for violence, the gladiators of Rome were not the noble savages of popular imagination but complex individuals caught in a system that transformed human suffering into public entertainment, yet who found ways to maintain their dignity and even achieve a form of immortality through the courage they displayed in the face of inevitable death. Their whispers echo still through the broken stones of the Colosseum, reminding us that behind every historical spectacle lie individual human beings, whose lives were no less precious for being lived in the service of other people's amusement. Food of the Roman legions. The great legions of Rome conquered the known world not only through superior tactics and discipline, but also through the simple yet revolutionary understanding that an army marches on its stomach, and that the key to maintaining troops in fighting condition across vast distances and extended campaigns lay in the careful provision of reliable, nutritious food that could be prepared under any conditions, from Britain's misty forests to Egypt's burning deserts. Picture now a Roman legionary camp at dusk, somewhere along the Danube frontier, where 10,000 men have just completed another day's march toward an enemy whose name they may not even know, whose language they cannot speak, but whom they will face with the calm confidence that comes from knowing that tonight, as every night for months or years, they will eat the same simple, satisfying meal that has sustained Roman armies since the days of the Republic. The foundation of every legionary's diet was grain, usually wheat when available, but barley, rye, or even oats when circumstances demanded, ground into flour and baked into the hard flatbread called bucellatum that could last for weeks without spoiling and provided the carbohydrates necessary for men who walked 20 miles a day carrying 60 pounds of equipment on their backs. This bread was not the refined product that graced patrician tables in Rome, but a coarse, dense loaf that filled the stomach and provided energy for the endless labor of empire-building. Each legionary received a daily ration of approximately 3 pounds of grain, enough to sustain a man engaged in heavy physical labor. And the evening preparation of this basic staple became a ritual that bound the army together across cultural and linguistic barriers that might otherwise have divided men drawn from every corner of the Mediterranean world. The sound of grinding grain and the smell of baking bread became the sensory signatures of Roman military life, constants that remained unchanged whether the legion was camped beside the Rhine, the Euphrates, or the Atlantic shores of Portugal. But bread alone could not maintain men in fighting condition, and the Roman military supply system, that marvel of organization that enabled armies to operate thousands of miles from their home bases for years at a time, ensured that each legion received regular supplies of the protein and fats necessary for optimal health. Salt pork, preserved in wooden barrels and transported by ox-drawn wagons over roads built by earlier generations of legionaries, provided both flavor and the fats necessary for men whose bodies burned calories at rates that would challenge modern athletes. The famous Roman fish sauce, called garum, made from fermented fish entrails and considered a delicacy by civilians, served a crucial military purpose as well, providing both salt for preservation and intense flavor that could make even the most monotonous rations palatable to men who might eat the same basic meal for months at a time. A few drops of garum could transform a simple stew of barley and vegetables into something approaching a feast, maintaining morale in conditions where small pleasures took on enormous psychological importance. Cheese, usually hard varieties that could survive long transport without refrigeration, provided additional protein and fats while adding variety to meals that might otherwise have become unbearably monotonous during extended campaigns. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites throughout the empire reveals the remains of cheese-making equipment, suggesting that legions often produced their own dairy products when local supplies were available, adapting their diet to local conditions while maintaining the basic nutritional standards that kept them fighting fit. The preparation of meals in a Roman military camp followed rituals as precise and disciplined as any parade ground maneuver, with each 8-man contubernium the basic unit of legionary organization, taking turns at cooking duty while their tentmates performed other necessary tasks. The shared meal became a moment of community in lives otherwise dominated by hierarchy and discipline, a time when men could speak freely of home, family, and the uncertainties of campaign life while their hands performed the familiar tasks of chopping vegetables, tending fires, and stirring the simple stews that nourish the world's most effective military machine, lentils and chickpeas, dried and transported in leather sacks, provided additional protein and helped prevent the diseases that could devastate armies living on restricted diets for extended periods. These legumes, prepared as thick porridges or added to stews, swelled in the stomach to provide a feeling of fullness that helped maintain morale among men who often went to sleep hungry despite their regular rations, their bodies constantly demanding more fuel than the military supply system could reasonably provide. When local conditions permitted, Roman armies supplemented their basic rations with foraged foods, wild greens and fruits that provided essential vitamins while adding variety to meals that could otherwise become soul-crushingly repetitive. The soldiers of Rome became expert at identifying edible plants in every climate and terrain, knowledge that was passed down through the ranks and often meant the difference between health and disease during long campaigns in unfamiliar territories. The mead halls of the Saxons far from the sun-drenched stones of the Mediterranean world. In the mist-trapped lands beyond Hadrian's Wall, a different kind of civilization flourished around the warm glow of mead halls that served as the beating hearts of Saxon communities scattered across the forests and downs of early medieval Britain. These great timber buildings, with their soaring rooflines and walls of oak hewn from ancient forests, provided shelter not just from the harsh northern weather but from the uncertainties of a world where loyalty and honor were the only currencies that truly mattered in the struggle for survival. Step with us now across the threshold of such a hall on a winter evening, when the wind howls through bare branches and frost glazes the windows with patterns that look like crystallized breath. Inside, the great fire burns in its central hearth, sending sparks dancing upward toward the smoke blackened rafters where shields and weapons hang like the offerings in some temple dedicated to the gods of war and brotherhood. The air is thick with the scent of burning oak and the sweet, intoxicating aroma of mead, that golden drink made from fermented honey that gave these halls their name and their purpose. The mead hall was not merely a building but an institution, a social center where the complex relationships that held Saxon society together were forged, maintained, and celebrated in rituals of drinking and gift-giving that transformed practical alliances into bonds of sacred obligation. Here the local lord, the thane or alderman who owned the hall and the lands around it, would gather his followers for feasts that served multiple purposes, providing food and entertainment, while reinforcing the hierarchy of loyalty that enabled small communities to survive in a world where central authority was weak and local. Strongmen provided the only real security. The construction of a mead hall represented an enormous investment of resources and labor for a Saxon community, requiring the felling of hundreds of great trees, their transport from forest to building site, and the skilled work of carpenters who understood not only the practical requirements of creating a large weather-tight structure, but also the symbolic importance of building. Something that would stand as a monument to the community's prosperity and the Lord's generosity. These halls, some of which could accommodate several hundred people, rose from the landscape, like wooden cathedrals dedicated to the secular religion of mutual obligation and shared celebration. The interior layout of a typical mead hall followed conventions that were as rigid as any church architecture, with the Lord's high seat positioned at the far end from the main entrance, elevated above the level of the common floor and often adorned with carved decorations that proclaimed his status and lineage. Along the sides of the hall stretched long tables where warriors, craftsmen, and honored guests took their places according to strict rules of precedence that everyone understood instinctively, their positions reflecting not only their current status but the complex web of relationships and obligations that connected every member of the community. The golden mead that gave these halls their identity was more than just an alcoholic beverage. It was a liquid embodiment of the community's wealth and the Lord's ability to provide for his followers. Made from honey, produced by bees that required careful tending and protection, mead represented the successful management of resources and the transformation of natural abundance into social cohesion. The brewing process itself, which could take months to complete properly, required knowledge and skill that were passed down through generations of women who understood the subtle alchemy of fermentation and flavoring that turned simple honey into liquid gold. The serving of mead in a Saxon hall followed ritualized patterns that reinforced social bonds while providing opportunities for the public recognition of achievement and loyalty. The Lord's wife or daughter, often referred to as the peace weaver for her role in maintaining harmony within the community, would carry the mead cup from warrior to warrior, beginning with the most honored guests and working her way down the hierarchy of the hall. Each recipient would accept the cup with words of gratitude and loyalty, often followed by boasts of past achievements or promises of future service that bound the community together in webs of mutual obligation. The long tables that dominated the interior space of mead halls were more than just furniture. They were the architectural expression of Saxon's social organization, their parallel lines creating spaces where men could sit side by side as equals, while still maintaining the hierarchical distinctions that governed their relationships outside the hall. These tables, often made from single enormous planks of oak that had been seasoned for years before use, could accommodate the entire adult population of a village during the great seasonal feasts that marked the rhythm of agricultural life. The walls of mead halls typically displayed the weapons, shields, and armor of the warriors who owed service to the Lord, their burnished metal surfaces reflecting the firelight and creating an atmosphere that was both martial and domestic, both threatening to enemies and welcoming to friends. These displays served practical purposes as well as decorative ones, keeping weapons dry and ready for use, while announcing to all who entered that this was a place where armed men gathered under the protection of a Lord powerful enough to maintain their loyalty and effective enough to lead them in battle. The great hearth that dominated the center of every mead hall was more than just a source of heat and light. It was the symbolic heart of the community, the place where food was prepared, stories were told, and the bonds of fellowship were forged in the warmth of shared flames. The fire was never allowed to die completely, its maintenance becoming a sacred duty that connected the present community to their ancestors who had tended similar fires in halls that had long since returned to the earth from which their timbers had been hewn. Musicians and storytellers found welcome in Saxon mead halls, their songs and tales providing entertainment during the long winter evenings while preserving the cultural memory of the community and connecting local events to the larger patterns of heroic tradition that gave meaning to individual lives. The scop, or professional bard, who could recite the genealogies of noble families and the great deeds of legendary heroes, held a position of honor in hall society. his words carrying the authority of cultural tradition and the power to transform ordinary men into heroes worthy of Colosseum. Only Rubykiss, Malatiles. Only Rubykiss has the luxurious texture that glides on smoothly, and leaves a rich, long-lasting color. His work, my men. His words carrying the authority, my Sakari, my Lysque. Aside my Sevses, my severed. Dequisis, Calispe, Tepilers. We see, Tesis, we may lie. We see, by my es, by my Myab. We see it Taliad, by its I crad, my esad, Kikko, give it as its I could be so lullied, gad we le as I say stit at the ass sit to bathizid get if to sit at asp to pust these as this remembrance as the evening progressed and the mead took effect. The formal hierarchies that govern daytime interactions would soften slightly, allowing for a kind of structured intimacy, where men could speak of their fears and hopes while still maintaining the bonds of loyalty and respect that held their world together. The hall became a space where the harsh realities of Saxon life, the constant threat of violence, disease, and starvation, could be temporarily forgotten in favor of fellowship, warmth, and the golden glow of mead that transformed ordinary men into a brotherhood bound by something stronger than blood and more enduring than individual ambition. Songs of loyalty and memory. The flickering light of the mead hall fires. When the last of the evening's food had been consumed and the golden cups passed hand to hand until even the most abstemious warriors felt the warm glow of honey, wine in their veins, the true magic of Saxon community would begin to unfold through the ancient art of storytelling. That sacred practice by which the past lived on in the present and ordinary men discovered their connection to heroes whose deeds had already passed into legend. The Scop would rise from his place near the fire, his harp cradled in hands that had memorized not just the melodies, but the entire cultural heritage of his people. Thousands of lines of poetry that preserved the genealogies of kings, the great battles that had decided the fate of kingdoms, and the personal stories of courage and betrayal that gave individual meaning to the larger patterns of history. His voice, trained from childhood to project clearly through the smoky air of great halls, would begin the familiar opening formulas that signaled the beginning of a performance that might continue until dawn. These were not simple entertainments, but sacred rituals of cultural transmission. Moments when the accumulated wisdom and memory of generations were passed on to young warriors, who would need to understand their place in the great continuum of Saxon history if they were to live and die with honor. The stories told in mead halls served as both inspiration and instruction, teaching through example the proper behavior of lords and retainers, while celebrating the values that held Saxon society together against the constant threats of invasion, internal conflict, and the slow dissolution that seemed to threaten all human institutions. The harp that accompanied these recitations was not merely a musical instrument, but a technology of memory, its familiar melodies serving as mnemonic devices that helped both performer and audience remember the exact words of poems that existed nowhere in written form, but only in the living memory of Tina, those who had learned them through years of careful listening and practice. The relationship between melody and verse was so intimate that changes in one inevitably affected the other, creating a system of cultural preservation that was both flexible enough to accommodate new material and stable enough to maintain essential traditions across generations. The content of these songs ranged from the mythical adventures of heroes like Beowulf, who fought monsters and dragons in landscapes that seemed to exist somewhere between reality and dream, to more recent historical events that many in the audience might have witnessed personally or heard described by participants. The boundary between history and legend was fluid in Saxon culture, with both categories of story serving the same essential function of connecting individual lives to larger patterns of meaning that transcended the brief span of any single human existence. The performance of these songs required not just memorization but creative interpretation, with skilled shops adapting familiar stories to specific audiences and occasions, adding details that would resonate with particular communities while maintaining the essential structure and meaning of traditional narratives. A story about a hero's generosity might be emphasized when performed before a lord known for his giving, while tales of loyalty might receive special attention in halls where the bonds between lord and retainer had recently been tested by conflict or hardship. The audience for these performances was not passive but actively engaged in the storytelling process, their responses and reactions helping to shape the direction and emphasis of the narrative, while their very presence validated the cultural importance of the stories being told. The communal nature of this experience created bonds between listeners that extended far beyond the walls of the Mead Hall, connecting individuals to their community's shared heritage, while reinforcing the values and expectations that govern their daily interactions. The emotional power of these performances derived not just from their content, but from their context, the way in which familiar stories took on new meaning when heard in the company of men who might face similar challenges in their own lives. A tale of a warrior's last stand against overwhelming odds carried different weight when heard by soldiers who knew they might soon face similar choices, while stories of faithful retainers who died for their lords resonated powerfully in communities where such loyalty was both expected and regularly tested by the harsh realities of Saxon political life. The language of these songs was deliberately archaic and formal, filled with compound epithets and alliterative phrases that set the stories apart from ordinary speech while creating a sense of dignity and importance that elevated both performers and audience above the mundane concerns of daily life. This special poetic diction, passed down through generations of shows, created a sacred space within the secular environment of the Mead Hall, transforming the act of storytelling into something approaching religious ritual. The themes that dominated Saxon heroic poetry reflected the central concerns of a warrior culture constantly threatened by violence and instability, with loyalty, courage, and honor forming the trinity of virtues that enabled individuals and communities to maintain their integrity in the face of forces that threatened to destroy everything they valued. The tragic tone that pervades much of this poetry, with its emphasis on the transience of earthly glory and the inevitability of death, provided a philosophical framework that helped Saxon warriors accept the harsh realities of their existence while maintaining their commitment to the values that gave their lives meaning. As the night deepened and the fire burned lower, the songs would gradually shift from the grand adventures of legendary heroes to more intimate tales of personal loss and remembrance. Stories that honored the dead while comforting the living with reminders that death with honor was preferable to life without dignity. These quieter moments in the evenings entertainment allowed the community to acknowledge the losses they had suffered while reaffirming their determination to continue the struggle that defined their existence. The memory of these performances would linger long after the last notes of the harp had faded into silence, the stories becoming part of the mental furniture of those who had heard them, available for recall during moments of crisis when individuals needed reminders of the proper way to behave in situations that tested their commitment to the values their culture held most dear. In this way, the songs performed in mead halls became living guides to ethical behavior, their heroes serving as models for emulation and their villains as warnings of the consequences of abandoning the loyalty and honor that held Saxon society together. Saxon festivals and feasts, a rhythm of Saxon life pulsed with the ancient cycles of season and harvest, marked by festivals that transformed scattered rural communities into temporary Cities of celebration were the boundaries between sacred and secular, between work and worship, dissolved in the shared recognition that human survival depended upon the successful negotiation of humanity's relationship with the natural world and the mysterious forces that governed fertility, weather, and the eternal dance of death and renewal that shaped all existence. The Great Feast of Yule, celebrated during the darkest days of winter, when the sun seemed to have abandoned the world entirely, brought together entire communities in multi-day celebrations that combined pre-Christian traditions with newer customs, borrowed from contact with Christian neighbors, creating syncretic rituals that served the essential function of maintaining hope and community solidarity during the season when death seemed most likely to claim the weak, the old, and the unlucky. The preparation for these festivals began weeks in advance, with livestock slaughtered and preserved, grain ground and baked into special breads, and ale brewed in quantities sufficient to sustain celebration that might continue for 12 days or more. The centerpiece of Yule celebrations was invariably a great feast held in the largest Mead hall available to the community, where tables groaned under the weight of roasted meat, fresh bread, and all the accumulated delicacies that could be preserved from the autumn harvest or obtained through trade with neighboring settlements. These feasts served not only to provide welcome relief from the monotonous diet of winter, but also to demonstrate the community's prosperity and the Lord's ability to provide for His people during the most challenging season of the year. The boar's head, carried into the hall with great ceremony and placed before the Lord, as a symbol of His authority and the community's success in the hunt, represented more than just impressive cuisine, but embodied the Saxon understanding of the relationship between human society and the natural world, acknowledging that civilization existed in constant tension with the wild forces that could destroy it, while celebrating humanity's ability to transform those same forces into sources of sustenance and strength. Beltane, celebrated at the beginning of May when the earth renewed itself with green growth and the promise of summer abundance, provided opportunities for communities to gather in outdoor celebrations that honored fertility in all its forms. From the breeding of livestock to the planting of crops, to the courtship rituals that would result in marriages and new children to carry on the community's existence into an uncertain future. These spring festivals often lasted for days, with dancing, music, and feasting that continued from sunset to sunrise as communities celebrated their survival through another winter and their hope for prosperity in the coming year. The harvest festivals of late summer and early autumn marked the culmination of the agricultural year, when communities gathered to celebrate successful crops while acknowledging the constant threat of famine that made good harvests matters of life and death rather than mere economic convenience. These celebrations combine thanksgiving for past abundance with prayers for continued prosperity. Their rituals designed to ensure the favor of whatever gods or spirits controlled the weather, the soil, and the mysterious processes by which seeds became grain and grain became bread. The preparation of food for these great festivals required the coordinated effort of entire communities, with specialized tasks assigned according to age, gender, and skill in patterns that reinforced social bonds while ensuring that every aspect of the celebration would be properly managed. Women who spent most of the year working in isolation with their immediate families found themselves part of larger groups preparing vast quantities of bread, brewing ale in ceramic vessels large enough to serve hundreds of people, and creating the elaborate dishes that would mark these occasions as special and memorable. The hunting parties that provided meat for festival tables followed traditions as ancient as Saxon settlement in Britain, with groups of men and dogs ranging through forests and downs in pursuit of deer, boar, and other game whose capture required not only individual skill but coordinated effort that strengthened the bonds between hunters while providing the protein necessary to support communities through the lean months of winter. The successful completion of these hunts was celebrated with rituals that honored both the skill of the hunters and the sacrifice of the animals whose death enabled human survival. The brewing of special ales and meads for festival consumption began weeks before the celebrations themselves, with master brewers carefully tending fermentation, processes that would transform simple grains and honey into beverages potent enough to fuel multi-day celebrations while flavorful enough to mark these occasions as distinct from the ordinary consumption of daily life. The recipes for these special drinks were closely guarded, secrets passed down through generations of brewers who understood that the success of community celebrations depended in large part upon the quality and quantity of alcohol available to fuel the collective joy that made festivals effective tools of social cohesion. The games and competitions that accompanied Saxon festivals served not only as entertainment but as training exercises that maintained the physical skills necessary for survival in a world where individual and community security depended upon the ability of men to fight effectively when threatened by enemies. Wrestling matches, weapon practice, and horse racing provided opportunities for young men to display their abilities while allowing older warriors to assess the combat potential of the next generation and identify individuals who might benefit from additional training or who showed promise as future leaders. The storytelling and music that formed essential elements of festival entertainment differed from the more formal performances of the mead halls in their emphasis on participation rather than passive consumption, with entire communities joining in familiar songs and dances that connected present celebrations. Two similar festivals stretching back through generations of ancestors who had gathered in the same places to mark the same seasonal transitions. These participatory performances created temporary communities that transcended the usual boundaries of class, kinship, and locality, binding participants together in shared experiences that would be remembered long after the festivals ended. The distribution of gifts during festivals, particularly the presents given by lords to their retainers during Yule celebrations, served important social and economic functions that went far beyond simple generosity, creating and reinforcing bonds of obligation and loyalty that held Saxon society together while redistributing wealth in ways that ensured community survival during difficult times. These gift exchanges followed complex protocols that acknowledged existing hierarchies while providing opportunities for individuals to improve their status through service, loyalty, and demonstration of valuable skills. As these festivals drew to their inevitable conclusions, with the last of the special foods consumed and the final toasts offered to gods, ancestors, and the uncertain future, participants would return to their daily routines, carrying with them renewed sense of community membership and cultural identity that would sustain them through the months ahead until the cycle of seasonal celebration brought them together again for another round of feasting, fellowship, and collective affirmation of the values that made their precarious existence meaningful despite its obvious hardships and limitations. Echoes across time. Stones of the Colosseum and the timber frames of Saxon mead halls, separated by centuries and thousands of miles, speak to us across the vast darkness of history with voices that carry remarkably similar messages about the human need for community, the power of shared ritual to bind strangers into families, and the eternal struggle to create meaning and dignity in the face of mortality, violence, and the slow but inexorable passage of time that reduces all human achievements to fragments of memory preserved in ruins that themselves will eventually return to the dust from which they rose. Standing now in the intersection of these two worlds, we can see how the Roman legions, marching across Brit, carried with them not just weapons and military discipline, but also the seeds of transformation that would eventually grow into the hybrid culture of post-Roman Britain, where Saxon lords learned to appreciate Roman engineering while Roman administrators adopted Saxon customs of personal loyalty and gift exchange. The collision of these civilizations created something entirely new, a synthesis that preserved elements of both while belonging fully to neither. The ritual consumption of food and drink that marked both Roman military life and Saxon festival celebration reveals deep human constants that transcend the specific forms taken by different cultures. The universal recognition that sharing meals creates bonds between individuals that extend far beyond the immediate moment of consumption. Whether Roman soldiers gathered around their campfires sharing rations of grain and garum, or Saxon warriors passing the mead cup from hand to hand in timber halls, the act of eating together transformed collections of individuals into communities, capable of collective action and mutual sacrifice. The stories told in both contexts, whether the military histories that Roman soldiers shared around their evening fires or the heroic poems recited by Saxon shops and mead halls filled with golden light, served similar functions in helping individuals understand their place within larger narratives of purpose and meaning that made personal suffering and sacrifice comprehensible as part of something greater than individual existence. These stories provided maps of moral behavior that guided decision-making in situations where the difference between honor and shame, between loyalty and betrayal, might determine not only individual fate, but the survival of entire communities. The architectural spaces that housed these different forms of community gathering, from the stone amphitheaters that showcased Roman power to the wooden halls that sheltered Saxon fellowship, demonstrate humanity's consistent need to create physical environments that support and enhance social relationships while providing protection from the chaos and uncertainty that constantly threaten to dissolve the fragile bonds that hold civilization together. These buildings were not mere shelter, but active participants in the creation of cultural identity, their forms reflecting and reinforcing the values of the societies that built them. The gradual transformation of Roman stones into medieval buildings parallels the slower, but equally profound transformation of Roman administrative practices into Saxon political structures, both processes demonstrating how human societies adapt and evolve by incorporating useful elements from their predecessors while developing new solutions to persistent problems of organization, resource allocation, and collective decision-making. The continuity hidden within apparent change reveals the deep structures of human social organization that persist despite the rise and fall of specific political systems and cultural traditions. The seasonal rhythms that governed both Roman military campaigns and Saxon agricultural festivals remind us that human societies, no matter how sophisticated or powerful, remain fundamentally dependent upon natural cycles and environmental conditions that operate according to laws far older and more fundamental than any human institution. The acknowledgement of this dependence, whether through Roman religious observances that sought divine favor for military enterprises or Saxon celebrations that honored the fertility of the earth, demonstrates a humility that modern technological societies sometimes forget in their enthusiasm for human mastery over natural forces. The role of memory in both cultures, preserved through Roman military records and Saxon oral traditions, highlights the essential human need to maintain connection with the past as a source of identity, guidance, and legitimacy for present actions. The techniques developed by both societies for preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge across generations reveal sophisticated understanding of the relationship between individual memory and collective consciousness, between personal experience and historical continuity. The emphasis on loyalty and honor that characterized both Roman military culture and Saxon Warrior society speaks to universal human values that transcend specific cultural forms while adapting to different social and environmental conditions. The Roman soldier's oath to the legion and the Saxon warrior's bond to his lord represented different expressions of the same fundamental recognition that individual survival and prosperity depend upon reliable relationships with others who share similar commitments to mutual support and collective welfare. The archaeological record left by both civilizations, from the massive stone foundations of Roman buildings to the post holes that mark the locations of Saxon halls, provides physical evidence of human ambition and achievement that outlasts the lexical structures and social relationships that originally gave these artifacts meaning. These material remains become the raw material for new stories, new interpretations, and new connections between past and present that demonstrate the ongoing relevance of historical experience for contemporary life. The gradual decay of both Roman and Saxon civilizations, whether through barbarian invasion, internal conflict, or simple economic exhaustion, reminds us that all human achievements are temporary, subject to forces beyond individual or collective control that eventually dissolve even the most impressive monuments to human ingenuity and determination. Yet the persistence of their influence, visible in everything from legal systems to architectural styles to linguistic patterns, suggests that the essential contributions of any civilization outlive its political existence, becoming part of the larger human heritage that connects all societies across time and space. Drifting into silence, the fire has burned low now, its flames settling into glowing coals that pulse with the slow rhythm of a sleeping heart. And in this dimming light, the stories we have shared begin to fade like mist dissolving before the morning sun, their details becoming less distinct even as their essential truths sink deeper into memory where they will rest, alongside all the other tales that have shaped our understanding of what it means to be human in a world where time transforms all monuments into ruins and all certainties into questions. The missing stones of the Colosseum continue their patient journey through the streets of Rome, supporting the weight of churches where prayers rise toward heaven from lips that speak languages unknown to Caesar, carrying within their crystalline structure the molecular memory of gladiatorial blood and the tears of those who wept for the condemned, now pressed into service for holier purposes in a transformation so complete that it speaks to the infinite capacity of matter itself to find new meaning in new circumstances, new purposes in new ages. The Saxon mead halls have long since returned to the earth from which their timbers were hewn, their oak beams rotting into soil that now supports different forests, different communities, different dreams of permanence that will themselves prove as temporary as the dreams of Roman senators who believed their empire would last forever, as fragile as the hopes of Saxon warriors who trusted that loyalty and honor would protect them from the changes that time brings to all human institutions regardless of their apparent strength or moral foundation. Yet something persists beyond the dissolution of specific forms, something that connects the Roman soldier sharing his evening meal beside a campfire on Hadrian's wall to the Saxon lord distributing gifts in his timber hall, something that links both to ourselves as we sit beside our own fires, literal or metaphorical, and contemplate the strange continuity that runs through all human experience like a golden thread woven through fabric that changes color and texture across the centuries but maintains its essential pattern despite all transformations. The rhythm of seasons continues unchanged. Spring following winter, harvest following planting, feast following famine in cycles that outlast all political systems and cultural traditions, providing the deep structure within which human societies rise and fall like waves upon a shore that remains constant even as it shapes and is shaped by the waters that touch it. The moon rises tonight over ruins that have forgotten their builders' names, its light falling equally upon broken stones and growing grass, upon the quick and the dead, upon the remembered and the forgotten, with the same serene indifference that has marked its passage. Since before humans learned to build with stone or wood or dream of permanence in a universe where change is the only constant, the voices that once filled amphitheaters and mead halls have fallen silent. But silence itself carries its own kind of eloquence, speaking of rest after labor, of peace after conflict, of the deep contentment that comes to those who accept the natural rhythm of beginning and ending that governs all existence, from the smallest grain of sand to the mightiest empire, from the briefest human life to the longest geological age, from the first spark of consciousness to the final entropy that awaits all organized systems in the fullness of time. In this deepening quiet, we can almost hear the whisper of wind through broken arches, the rustle of leaves growing from soil enriched by the decay of forgotten civilizations, the distant sound of water flowing over stones that may once have been part of aqueducts or foundations, now return to their natural state and continuing their own patient journey toward the sea that receives all rivers regardless of their source or the lands through which they have passed on their way to dissolution and rebirth. The stories we have shared tonight take their place now among all the stories that have ever been told beside fires that have burned and died across the centuries, joining the vast library of human memory that exists not in any building or collection, but in the collective consciousness of our species, that strange repository of dreams and experiences that connects each generation to all those that came before, and all those yet to come in an unbroken chain of storytelling that began when the first human looked into flames and saw there's something worthy of sharing with others. Sleep comes now like tide returning to shore, gentle and inevitable, carrying with it the echoes of all we have contemplated together, the weight of centuries compressed into this single evening's journey through time and memory, through ruin and renewal, through the endless cycle of construction and decay that marks the passage of human civilizations across the face of an earth that remembers everything and forgets nothing, that holds within its layers all the stories we have told and all the stories yet to be discovered by future archaeologists of sleep and dream. Let the darkness gather around us now like a familiar blanket, warm with the residual heat of contemplation, soft with the accumulated dreams of all who have sought rest after pondering the mysteries of time and change, of loyalty and memory, of stones that travel through centuries and stories that outlast the civilizations that first gave them voice, finding new life in new times, new meaning in new contexts, eternal as the human need to make sense of existence through the sharing of tales that connect us to something larger than our individual lives. The fire dies to embers. The embers fade to ash. The ash will nourish new growth in seasons yet to come. And in that cycle, we find the only permanence available to mortal beings, the continuity of transformation itself, the eternal return of matter and energy through forms as temporary as our own brief participation in the vast conversation between past and future that we call the present moment, the only time we truly possess, the only space where stories can be told and heard and passed along to others who will carry them forward into whatever darkness or light awaits beyond the circle of our dying fire. The silent streets of Pompeii beyond the broken walls of Rome, beneath layers of volcanic ash that fell like snow on an August morning in the year 7, the city of Pompeii sleeps its eternal sleep, its streets frozen in a moment of ordinary life that became extraordinary through the simple accident of preservation, where time stopped not gradually like the slow decay that claimed the Colosseum's missing stones, but instantly, completely, trapping an entire civilization in amber made of pumice and volcanic debris. Walk now through these silent streets, where no footsteps have echoed for nearly 2,000 years. past bakeries where loaves of bread still sit in ovens, their crusts carbonized but their shapes intact, past taverns where wine cups rest upon tables as if their owners had merely stepped outside for a moment and would return to finish their conversations about politics, trade, and the thousand small concerns that filled Roman minds before the mountain exploded and transformed their mundane Tuesday into humanity's most perfectly preserved archaeological treasure, the plaster casts of Pompeii's final residence, created by pouring liquid plaster into the human-shaped voids left in the hardened ash, reveal with heartbreaking intimacy the last moments of lives that ended without warning or preparation. Families huddled together in basement rooms, slaves still wearing their iron collars, children clutching toys they would never again have the chance to play with, their final gestures preserved with a fidelity that no sculptor could match and no historian could have imagined. In the house of the Veti, wealthy merchant's villa, where frescoes still glow with colors as vivid as the day they were painted, we find rooms decorated with scenes of mythological love and domestic prosperity that speak to universal human desires for beauty, comfort, and the kind of security that comes from surrounding oneself with objects that reflect one's taste and status. Desires that proved as fragile as spiderwebs when Vesuvius decided to remind humanity of its place in the natural order. The gladiatorial barracks discovered in Pompeii's outskirts revealed not only the living conditions of professional fighters, but also their human relationships, including the skeleton of a woman found in the barracks wearing expensive jewelry, possibly the wife or lover of one of the gladiators. Her presence there in the moment of disaster speaking to bonds of affection that transcended the brutal realities of arena combat and the rigid social hierarchies that normally separated free citizens from those condemned to fight for others. Entertainment. The graffiti scrawled on Pompeii's walls by hands that had no idea they were writing for posterity provides an unfiltered glimpse into the thoughts and concerns of ordinary Romans. Their crude jokes, romantic declarations, business advertisements, and political slogans creating a kind of social media, carved in stone, that reveals how little human nature has changed across the centuries. How the same desires for love, recognition, and meaning that drive us today drove our ancestors through their daily routines in the shadow of a mountain they did not know was preparing to destroy them. The workshops and businesses preserved throughout Pompeii demonstrate the incredible diversity and sophistication of Roman urban economy. From fulleries where cloth was cleaned using fermented urine to bakeries equipped with mechanical mills, powered by slaves or donkeys. From garum production facilities where fish sauce was fermented in enormous ceramic vessels to thermopolia, ancient fast food restaurants where working Romans could purchase hot meals prepared in large ceramic containers set into marble counters still visible today. The Villa of Mysteries, with its famous fresco cycle depicting what appears to be the initiation of women into the cult of Dionysus, opens a window into the religious and spiritual life of Romans who sought meaning beyond the official state cults. Their mysterious rituals preserved in paintings that continue to puzzle scholars while speaking to the universal human need for transcendent experiences that connect individual lives to larger cosmic purposes and divine mysteries that cannot be comprehended through reason alone. The garden spaces preserved throughout Pompeii, where root cavities in the hardened ash have revealed the exact locations of trees, shrubs, and flowering plants, allow us to reconstruct not only the visual appearance of Roman domestic landscapes, but also their sensory qualities. The scents of roses and jasmine that would have perfumed the air. The sound of fountains trickling in courtyards where families gathered during the heat of summer afternoons. The taste of fruits and vegetables grown in soil that would soon become their tomb as we move through these preserved spaces where shadows have been transformed into substance. and absence has become the most eloquent presence. We feel the strange intimacy that connects us to people whose names we will never know, but whose humanity reaches across 20 centuries to touch our own. Their sudden silence speaking more powerfully than any historical chronicle about the fragility of the daily routines and future plans that give structure to mortal existence. The vulnerability of all human arrangements before forces larger than individual will or collective wisdom. The whispered secrets of medieval monasteries in the mist-shrouded valleys of medieval Europe, where time moved with the measured pace of prayer bells marking the canonical hours. Monastery walls enclose not just communities of monks devoted to divine service, but entire civilizations in miniature, repositories of knowledge and centers of innovation that preserve the learning of antiquity, while developing new techniques of agriculture, medicine, and scholarship that would eventually transform the world beyond their cloistered confines. The scriptoriums of medieval monasteries. Those quiet chambers where monks bent over vellum pages in the flickering light of oil lamps and candles, served as humanity's primary defense against the loss of classical learning during the centuries when barbarian invasions and political chaos threatened to plunge Europe into permanent darkness. Their patient copying of ancient texts creating libraries that would later fuel the Renaissance and preserve for posterity works that would otherwise have vanished completely from human memory. Each illuminated manuscript produced in these scriptoriums represented months or years of labor by skilled artisans who combined the functions of scribe, artist, and scholar. Their decorated pages featuring intricate patterns, miniature paintings, and marginalia that transformed the simple act of reading into a visual feast that engaged multiple senses while demonstrating the medieval understanding that beauty and knowledge were inseparable aspects of divine truth, both worthy of the highest human effort and artistic achievement. The daily routine of medieval monasteries followed patterns established in the 6th century by Saint Benedict, whose rule created a balanced life of prayer, work, and study that proved so successful that it spread throughout Europe and continues to influence monastic communities today. Its emphasis on moderation, community, and productive labor offering an alternative to both the extreme asceticism of desert hermits and the worldly corruption that too often characterized secular society. During the medieval period, the herb gardens, maintained by monastery infirmarians, contained not only the ingredients for medieval medicine, but also the accumulated botanical knowledge of centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Their neat rows of medicinal plants representing libraries of healing wisdom that connected European monasteries to ancient Greek and Roman medical traditions, while incorporating folk remedies learned from local populations and new discoveries made through systematic cultivation and testing of plant properties. The workshops attached to medieval monasteries produced everything from illuminated manuscripts to stained glass windows, from carved stone capitals to metalwork of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. Their craftsmen developing techniques that would later be adopted by secular artisans and creating works of art that still inspire wonder and admiration centuries after their creation. Their combination of technical skill and spiritual devotion resulting in objects that seem to embody the medieval belief that all honest labor could serve as a form of prayer. The hospitality offered by monasteries to travelers, pilgrims, and the poor created networks of mutual support that spanned the continent, with guest houses attached to major abbeys providing not only food and shelter, but also news, trade connections, and cultural exchange that helped maintain communication between distant regions during periods when central authority was weak and travel was dangerous. Their charity serving both spiritual and practical purposes that benefited entire societies. The agricultural innovations developed on monastic lands, from improved plowing techniques to crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility without chemical fertilizers. demonstrated the medieval understanding that spiritual devotion and practical wisdom were complementary rather than contradictory approaches to human flourishing. Their successful farming methods often spreading to surrounding secular communities and contributing to population growth and economic development that laid the foundation for later medieval prosperity. The schools established in monasteries educated not only future monks, but also the sons of nobles and merchants, who would later serve as administrators, diplomats, and scholars in secular society. Their curricula combining classical learning with Christian theology and practical skills, creating educated elites who could read Latin, understand law, and manage complex institutions while maintaining the cultural continuity that connected medieval Europe to its classical heritage. The libraries of great monasteries like Cluny, Monte Cassino, and Sankt Gallen contained thousands of volumes at a time when most secular rulers owned fewer books than a modern household. Their collections spanning theology, philosophy, history, medicine, astronomy, and literature, creating centers of learning that attracted scholars from across Europe, while preserving texts that would otherwise have been lost during the political upheavals and economic disruptions that characterized much of the medieval period. The music developed in monastic settings, from Gregorian chant to polyphonic innovations that would later evolve into Renaissance and modern musical traditions, created sonic environments that enhanced both private meditation and community worship while demonstrating the medieval belief that mathematical harmony reflected divine order. Their complex rhythms and melodic structures, requiring both artistic sensitivity and intellectual sophistication, that challenged the stereotype of medieval life as simple or primitive. As we walk in imagination through these peaceful cloisters where generations of monks pursued their quiet revolution of preservation and innovation, we feel the presence of a different kind of ambition than that which built amphitheaters or mead halls. An ambition directed not toward conquest or celebration, but toward understanding, preservation, and the slow transformation of human consciousness through contemplation, study, and the patient accumulation of wisdom that would eventually emerge from these sheltered valleys to reshape the entire world. The floating cities of Venice, resizing from the waters of the Adriatic, like a dream made manifest in marble and mosaic. The Republic of Venice created something unprecedented in human history. A civilization built entirely upon the sea, where gondolas replaced horses, canals served as streets, and the rhythm of tides marked time more precisely than any mechanical clock, transforming the challenges of an impossible location into advantages that would make Venice the wealthiest and most powerful city-state of the medieval world. The original settlers, who fled to these marshy islands during the barbarian invasions of the 5th and 6th centuries, could hardly have imagined that their temporary refuge would become the foundation of an empire that would dominate Mediterranean trade for 1,000 years. Their descendants developing techniques of pile driving and foundation laying that enabled the construction of palaces and churches on ground that seemed too unstable to support anything more substantial than fishermen's huts. The millions of wooden piles driven into the mud of the Venetian lagoon to support the city's buildings came from forests throughout the Adriatic region. Their submerged timbers preserved by the salt water and anaerobic conditions that prevented decay, creating a foundation system so effective that many of the original structures still stand today. Their stones resting upon wood that has been harder than concrete for more than a millennium. Testimony to human ingenuity in adapting to environmental challenges that would have defeated less determined societies. The arsenal of Venice, that vast complex of shipyards and workshops that occupied nearly 1/6 of the city's total area, pioneered techniques of mass production and standardized manufacturing that would not be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. Its assembly line methods enabling the construction of warships and merchant vessels at a pace that amazed contemporary observers and gave Venice the naval superiority necessary to maintain its commercial empire against larger but less efficient rivals. The Doge's Palace, with its distinctive pink and white facade that seems to float above the waters of St. Mark's Basin, embodied the unique character of Venetian governance, a republican system that balanced aristocratic privilege with mercantile pragmatism while maintaining political stability that lasted for more than 1,000 years, longer than any other government in European history. Its success based on the understanding that trade required peace and that peace required justice. At least among the merchant classes who controlled the city's destiny, the glassmakers of Murano relocated to their island workshop in the 13th century to prevent industrial espionage and reduce scare hazards in the main city, developed techniques of crystal and colored glass production that made Venetian glassware the most prized luxury goods in medieval Europe, their closely guarded secrets passing from father to son in families, who became wealthy beyond the dreams of most nobles while maintaining the artisanal traditions that kept Venice at the forefront of technological innovation. The spice trade that formed the foundation of Venetian wealth connected Europe to the luxury goods of Asia through commercial networks that stretched from London to Constantinople to Cairo to India, with Venetian merchants serving as intermediaries who understood not only the arts of navigation and negotiation, but also the complex diplomatic and financial arrangements necessary to maintain peaceful relationships with the dozens of different governments, religions, and cultures that controlled various segments of these profitable trade routes, the religious processions that marked the Venetian calendar. From the annual marriage to the sea ceremony that symbolized the city's dependence upon maritime trade to the elaborate festivals that celebrated patron saints and military victories, created public spectacles that reinforced civic identity, while demonstrating the wealth and power that made Venice the envy of Europe. Their combination of sacred and secular elements, reflecting the Venetian understanding that commercial success and divine favor were complementary, rather than contradictory, aspects of human flourishing. The architecture of Venice, with its unique fusion of Byzantine, Islamic, and Western European influences, reflected the cosmopolitan character of a city whose merchants traded with every civilization around the Mediterranean and Black Seas, bringing home not only exotic goods but also artistic techniques, architectural innovations, and cultural practices that were incorporated into a distinctively Venetian synthesis that influenced architectural development throughout Europe while maintaining its own unmistakable character. The diplomatic service of Venice, with its network of ambassadors, consuls, and spies operating throughout the known world, created an information-gathering system that gave Venetian merchants and politicians advantages over competitors who lacked such comprehensive intelligence about political developments, market conditions, and military threats that might affect trade routes. Their reports home creating archives that modern historians still consult to understand the complex international relationships of the medieval and Renaissance periods. The decline of Venice, beginning in the late 15th century when Portuguese navigators discovered sea routes to Asia that bypassed the Mediterranean entirely, demonstrates how even the most successful human institutions remain vulnerable to technological and geographical changes beyond their control. Yet the city's adaptation to new circumstances, its transformation from commercial empire to cultural center and tourist destination, shows how societies can reinvent themselves while preserving the essential elements of their identity and character. The carnival traditions of Venice, with their elaborate masks and costumes that temporarily resolve social hierarchies while creating licensed spaces for behavior normally forbidden by law and custom, provided safety valves for social tensions while generating additional revenue from visitors attracted by the city's reputation for sophisticated entertainment. Their survival into the modern era demonstrating the enduring human need for festivals that allow temporary escape from the constraints of ordinary existence while reinforcing community bonds through shared celebration. As we drift now through these water-lapped streets where the sound of gondoliers' voices echoes between palace walls that have witnessed the rise and transformation of one of history's most remarkable civilizations, we feel the gentle, rocking motion of a city that learned to live in harmony with forces that might have destroyed less adaptable societies. Their success a testament to human creativity in turning apparent disadvantages into sources of strength and beauty that continue to inspire wonder centuries after their commercial empire dissolved into memory and myth. The silent temples of Angkor deep in the jungles of Cambodia, where massive tree roots embrace ancient stones with the slow patience of centuries and morning mist rises from moats that once reflected the glory of the Khmer Empire. The temple complex of Angkor spreads across hundreds of square miles like a vast stone prayer offered to gods whose names are remembered now only by scholars and the spirits that still haunt these corridors where kings once walked in procession toward altars, where the boundary between earth and heaven dissolved in clouds of incense and the chanting of priests who served deities, whose power seemed as eternal as the stones that housed their images. The construction of Angkor, what in the early 12th century represented the culmination of Khmer architectural achievement. Its 5 central towers rising like mountain peaks toward the sky in conscious imitation of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain that Hindu cosmology placed at the center of the universe, while its enormous moat, containing more water than any artificial lake in the world, symbolized the primordial ocean from which all existence emerged according to creation. Myths that connected earthly kingdoms to divine order through architectural metaphors that transformed religious devotion into stone and space. The bas-reliefs that cover the walls of Angkor Wat tell stories that span the entire range of Hindu and Buddhist mythology, from the churning of the cosmic ocean that produced the elixir of immortality, to the epic battles of the Ramayana, where gods and demons struggled for control of the universe. Their intricate carvings created by master sculptors who understood that stone could serve as scripture for populations, who could not read written texts, but who could absorb religious teachings through visual narratives that transformed temple walls into vast illustrated books. The hydraulic engineering that supported Angkor's population of over 1 million people during its peak period required the construction of reservoirs, canals, and drainage systems that controlled the monsoon floods while storing water for use during dry seasons. Their sophisticated understanding of water management enabling the Khmer Empire to support agricultural production that sustained not only the enormous labor force needed to build the temples, but also the armies, administrators, and craftsmen who extended Khmer influence throughout Southeast Asia. The daily life of Angkor during its golden age, reconstructed from Sanskrit inscriptions, Chinese travel accounts, and archaeological evidence, reveals a complex urban civilization that combined Hindu religious traditions with local customs and practical innovations, creating a society where Brahmin priests from India lived alongside indigenous shamans, where Sanskrit literature was studied in schools attached to temples, and where international trade brought luxury goods from China, India, and the Islamic world to markets where different languages, currencies, and measurement systems created a cosmopolitan atmosphere that rivaled contemporary European cities. The astronomical alignments built into Angkor's temple architecture reflect sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics that enabled Khmer architects to create structures that served as both religious centers and astronomical observatories. Their careful orientation to specific stars and planetary positions connecting earthly worship to cosmic rhythms while demonstrating the medieval Khmer belief that human society should mirror the mathematical harmony that governed the movements of celestial bodies. The decline of Angkor. Beginning in the 14th century, when military pressure from the Thai Kingdom of Ayutthaya combined with environmental changes and internal political conflicts to force the abandonment of the great temple city, followed patterns similar to those that affected other classical civilizations. Yet the jungle's reclamation of these monuments created unique conditions that preserved structures and sculptures while transforming them into something that transcended their original religious and political purposes. The rediscovery of Angkor by French explorers in the 19th century revealed to the modern world architectural achievements that rivaled anything produced by classical Greece or Rome. Yet the temple complex's integration with its tropical environment, where stone and vegetation intertwined in relationships that seemed almost symbiotic, created visual effects that European architecture had never attempted. Their organic fusion of artificial and natural elements offering new models for understanding the relationship between human creativity and environmental harmony. The restoration efforts that have continued for more than a century face unique challenges in preserving structures that were designed to interact with natural forces rather than resist them. Their architects having understood that tropical architecture must accommodate rather than oppose the growth of vegetation, the expansion and contraction of stone in response to temperature changes, and the seasonal flooding that brings both destruction and renewal to buildings that were conceived as temporary manifestations of eternal truths. The religious syncretism that characterized later periods of Angkor's development, when Buddhist teachings gradually merged with Hindu traditions and local animistic beliefs to create uniquely Cambodian forms of spiritual practice, demonstrates how great civilizations adapt and evolve while maintaining continuity with their founding principles. Their ability to incorporate new ideas while preserving essential elements of their cultural identity, enabling them to survive political changes that might otherwise have destroyed their distinctive character. The 1,000-year-old faces carved into the towers of the Bayon Temple, their serene expressions weathered by centuries of monsoon rains, but still radiating the compassionate wisdom that Buddhist art sought to embody in stone, continue to gaze out over landscapes that have changed dramatically since their creation, yet remain essentially the same in their seasonal rhythms of flood and drought, growth and decay. The eternal cycles that ancient Khmer artists understood as manifestations of divine truth that transcended human ambition and political power. The modern pilgrims who visit Angkor today, whether they come as tourists seeking photogenic ruins or as spiritual seekers drawn by the aura of sanctity that still permeates these spaces, participate in a form of cultural transmission that connects contemporary experience to medieval devotion, across gaps of time and understanding that might seem unbridgeable. Yet the universal human responses to beauty, mystery, and the sublime continue to make these ancient stones speak to hearts that beat with the same essential rhythms as those of the kings, priests, and craftsmen who created this stone symphony in honor of gods whose reality may be debated but whose power to inspire human creativity remains undeniable. The eternal flame, the fire that began our journey together, has now burned through the long night of memory and contemplation, its flames consuming not only the oak logs that fed its physical presence, but also the accumulated stories of human civilizations that rise and fall like sparks, ascending toward darkness, each one brilliant in its moment of existence before returning to the ash from which new growth will emerge in seasons yet unknown, their light joining the vast constellation of all the fires that have ever burned in all the hearths, where humans have gathered to share food, warmth, and the stories that make individual existence meaningful within the larger patterns of time and change. The stones of Rome continue their patient migration through the eternal city, supporting prayers in languages that Caesar never heard, sheltering families whose ancestors lived beyond the reach of Roman roads, carrying within their crystalline structure the molecular memory of gladiators and emperors, of builders and destroyers, of all who touched them during their journey from quarry to amphitheater to church to palace to museum. Their substance unchanged, even as their purposes have been transformed by the endless human need to build new meanings from the materials of the past. The timber halls of Saxon Britain have returned to forest, loam that nourishes different trees, different stories, different dreams of permanence. Yet something of their warmth persists in the tradition of hospitality that still welcomes strangers to English hearths, in the love of poetry that connects modern voices to ancient shops, in the understanding that loyalty and honor remain valuable currencies in human relationships, despite the political and economic changes that have transformed the contexts in which these virtues must be practiced. The streets of Pompeii remain frozen in their moment of ordinary catastrophe, their preserved spaces continuing to teach new generations about the fragility of daily routines and the importance of appreciating present moments that may never come again. Their silence speaking more eloquently than any historical document about the preciousness of life and the necessity of finding meaning in simple activities like sharing meals, making art, raising children, and maintaining the relationships that connect individuals to communities larger than themselves. The scriptoriums of medieval monasteries have given way to digital technologies that preserve knowledge in forms the ancient scribes could never have imagined. Yet their patient devotion to the preservation and transmission of wisdom continues in libraries, universities, and all the institutions where humans gather to study, learn, and pass on the accumulated insights of previous generations. Their understanding that knowledge and beauty are inseparable aspects of truth remaining, as relevant today as it was when illuminated manuscripts glowed in candlelight. The canals of Venice still reflect palace facades and carry gondolas through waters that connect the city to its maritime heritage, while the adaptation of this impossible city to modern circumstances demonstrates how human societies can reinvent themselves while preserving the essential elements of their identity. Their success in transforming from commercial empire to cultural treasure offering hope that other civilizations facing environmental and economic challenges might find similar paths to survival and renewal. The temples of Angkor continue to rise from jungle landscapes where stone and vegetation intertwine in relationships that suggest new possibilities for human architecture that works with rather than against natural forces. Their astronomical alignments still marking the passage of seasons and celestial events, while their carved faces gaze serenely over changes that would have astonished their creators yet remained fundamentally consistent with the cosmic rhythms they sought to embody in their sacred architecture. All these stories converge now in the dying light of our fire, their separate voices joining in a chorus that spans centuries and continents while singing of the same essential themes that connect all human experience across cultural and temporal boundaries. The universal needs for community, meaning, beauty, and connection to something larger than individual existence, needs that find expression in different forms but remain constant throughout the rise and fall of empires, the construction and decay of monuments, the birth and death of languages and traditions. The ash that remains when our fire has burned completely will enrich the soil where new growth will emerge, just as the accumulated wisdom of past civilizations provides the foundation for future human achievements. Their failures teaching caution while their successes inspire confidence that the problems facing contemporary societies are not fundamentally different from those that previous generations have already learned to solve through creativity, cooperation, and the patient application of human intelligence to the challenges of existence in a universe that operates according to laws, larger than human understanding but not beyond human adaptation. In this final moment before sleep claims our consciousness and carries us into dreams where past and present merge in the strange alchemy of memory and imagination. We rest in the understanding that our own small lives participate in patterns as ancient as the first humans, who gathered around fires to share food and stories. Our contemporary concerns connected to eternal themes that have always defined the human condition. Our modern challenges requiring the same virtues of courage, wisdom, and compassion that enabled our ancestors to create the civilizations, whose ruins continue to inspire and instruct us. The darkness gathers around us now like a familiar embrace, soft with the accumulated dreams of all who have sought rest after contemplating the mysteries of time and mortality, warm with the shared understanding that individual existence gains meaning through connection to the larger, human story that continues across generations, carrying forward the best insights and achievements of each age while adapting them to the particular circumstances and challenges that define each historical moment. Let sleep come now, like the tide returning to familiar shores, carrying with it all the stories we have shared and all the wisdom we have gathered from the ruins of ancient civilizations, their voices joining the vast chorus of human memory that sings us toward rest and renewal, toward dreams where broken stones rebuild themselves into perfect structures and vanished halls echo once more with the voices of those who understood that life's meaning lies not in permanence but in the quality of our participation in the eternal human conversation about how to live with dignity, create beauty, and love well in the brief time allotted to each generation of mortals, who kindle fires against the darkness and tell stories that outlast the civilizations that first gave them voice.